Generators are not paid.
Thank you. Through the presiding officer and CEO, Era. The question from David Mugisha was, why do we still need the 50 megawatt Namamve? And does the cost to operate it add to basically the tariff? Number one is that Namamve was brought on board. Maybe some background information is that Namamve, Agreco, these power plants were brought on board in around 2006, 7, 8, when we had a drought around 2005, which affected the hydrology of Lake Victoria. We had extremely less water. The lake literally almost dried out. It's also the biggest hydropower plants are on River Nile. Anything that will happen to River Nile to reduce on the water, it means as a country or as an economy, we don't have any energy security. So it's important that as a sector, we diversify our energy sources. And as you notice, there is a lot of solar that the authority has approved. Solar plants are coming up, and thermal falls into the same category of energy diversification, so that we have multiple sources and we're not relying only on River Nile. Yes, for that matter, we need Namamve as part of the energy security strategy for the electricity generation supply, and we need it to be available, especially where it is located, to supply the industrial base within Kampala. Does the cost to run this power plant add to the O&M cost? Yes, of course, as long as we need to maintain some minimum dispatch at the plant. Currently, in our PPA, we are fixing that at least one machine should be dispatched, and it's for technical reasons. We need to keep the fuel lines. HFO is a very viscous type of fuel. If you don't operate for some time, that power plant, it just begins to deteriorate, to clog the fuel lines. So we have to dispatch a minimum of 7 megawatts, but we should be able to dispatch at any one time 50 megawatts as per the conditions in the power purchase agreement. So that calls for keeping staff. It calls for keeping some minimum costs that are fixed on the power plant. And so those costs have to be met as part of the tariff cost that has to be paid. So that's why we need Namamve, and that's why we need some costs on that power plant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, CEO. Yeah, for the tariff to come down, when we get any new plants, the commissioning of that plant must be matched by growth in demand. If the demand stays stagnant, these new costs are all lumped onto this same customer base. So that's why the government is now pushing for expansion of the transmission grid and investment in the distribution grid. The more customers we have, the more benefit we'll get from these newer plants. Now, the other bit was on power losses in the, I think for the embedded generators. Yeah. Of course, yes, these losses are there, but for them to come down, you need, of course, to invest in the distribution grid as a starter. But also, the real solution lies in the fact that you need to have local demand. If you're going to have a plant somewhere in Kasese coming on the grid, and it's going to feed power, the load is in somewhere in Kampala. Now, transporting all that power all the way to Kampala means more losses as you hit the wires to transport that power. So we need to grow local demand where these small generators are. And also, of course, we need a little bit of more investment in the distribution grid. The deemed energy clauses in our power purchase agreements. Yes, of course, the earlier agreements were take-or-pay agreements, and that is really defined by the perception of the investors of Uganda as a country, as an investment destination. And this changes as the country grows and the atmosphere becomes better. So the earlier PPAs were take-or-pay because these investors do not want to take on the market risk, the demand risk. So they want to bring the plant and make sure that it will be paid. But as we move now, the government has moved that if you come to me now, by default, I don't sign a take-or-pay agreement. So that is where we are now. We're no longer entertaining that unless it's really an extreme case that must even get blessing from way up. Then the last one was on from Engineer Mobilu, inadequate revenue. Yeah, that is a trick. Yes, that is a tricky one. It's something we are grappling with. We engage the distributors in these discussions. Of course, as far as women is concerned, it's something that is embedded in the agreement. But we engage government, we engage the regulator in some of these things to find an amicable solution that the sector doesn't come to a halt. But we do hope that things will improve. But what happens is that either you encroach on the monies that you have some other activities so that you meet this payment, or if that doesn't happen and you go into default, then we are penalized by the generators, which adds another cost to the sector and the tariff. I thank you.
You can also comment on the proposal for managing vandalism, community engagement, not working in silos, engaging the security operatives from the private sector foundation.
Actually, most of these initiatives we've already undertaken. As a sector, we are engaging, sensitizing the communities. That is already ongoing. And actually, as UTCL, we even pay some money for people to protect some of the towers. There's some token money we pay out there to protect the towers. At the same time, we've tried out technology, but technology has also been vandalized. We had a pilot scheme in Kachira area. The vandals have become so smart that they went and removed the brains of that system. So the system itself was vandalized. But we're not giving up on technology. We still want to have another go, but it might be more expensive. And also, of course, changing the type of towers, as Michael talked about, from steel lattice towers to monopoles. Although those are more expensive. Lately, government has come out strongly, and the security forces have come into play. And I think you're going to see a lot more mean-looking men in those along those infrastructure corridors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pass on the mic to Umeme. The issue of poor setup of your offices where the technicians have to drive, for example, from Tororo to Majanji. Why aren't you responsive?
Thank you very much, and through the chair, CEO. Yes, as I mentioned in my presentation, that we are actually now reorganizing and restructuring our technical team in terms of the engineering department, where we are creating zones at a much lower level than our current district setup that will enable us to get closer to the customer in 2022. So right now we are going through that process, and we should be able to see significant improvements next year. We are also opening up some small offices in some of these areas where it's a long distance to get to our current district office. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. There's also additional clarification here that the Namave plant belongs to Ugandans. We have paid out through both the consumer and support from government. It only now requires keeping it in a way that it is safe for it to be called upon to stand in when we have challenges with the other renewable sources of energy, which largely depend on Mother Nature. And if Mother Nature is not there, then you must look at alternatives. So this is our plant, just like the transmission, the distribution, infrastructure, including transformers. So let's guard them jealously. Let's guard them jealously. We should support their existence because it was constructed on a build, own, operate, and transfer. And we are now in the process. Actually, we've already licensed UEGCL, as you saw in the presentation. This is now our plant. The issue is to keep it in good operational condition. It is not going to impose a high cost because already the cost of purchase of the plant has been incurred. It is now the pass-through cost, which also will come down with the use of our own oil. The team from UETC, from ERA, Patrick Kawihao, is asking these numbers. He sees so many numbers you are throwing around. Umeme is talking about 170. You talk about the average weighted cost at 504. Dr. Okoboy, you are in the room. But I remember when Umeme was presenting, they were clear that this is their portion. As part of the 504, Umeme's portion is 170. But Umeme is collecting on average 504 for entire sector. But Dr. Okoboy, can you pass on the mic to him?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, what you have just said is what I wanted to say, that Umeme presented half the picture, and it is indeed the presentation of what they are supposed to present, their own picture. But if they were to present the entire picture, then they would also have talked about the picture of how they collect another amount for the other operators within the industry. We have costs all the way from generation, transmission, and then for the distribution that we talked about, there's also the cost of supply. So under Umeme, there are two tariffs. There's the tariff part for distribution, and then the tariff part for supply. So if these two were clearly presented, it would have given a clear picture. I wouldn't want to go into the nitty-gritty of the details of each, but maybe I can just ask Vianney to make just a little clarification on that.
Okay, as you prepare your next set of questions, colleagues. Vianney, proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Just to supplement what Dr. Okoboy said, is that there's a difference between the distribution tariff and the end user tariff. So the distribution tariff that Umeme presented is 170 shillings per kilowatt hour, but the average weighted end user tariff is around 500 shillings, tending to 500. Yeah, so we have to compare apples with apples. So the 170 is the umeme portion. The 500 is a weighted average for the entire, the weighted average retail end user tariff.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to the next set of questions. The first one from online is from John Kisitu, and he's raising the pertinent concern that the whole sector is handling, that many megawatts are transmitted but not consumed. However, they are paid for. How about the domestic tariffs are lowered to create affordability, and these mega million watts are consumed by the few, I think he's saying a few available domestic customers. I think he's trying to raise an issue that we talk about surplus, but because of the nature of the agreements, this surplus is paid for. How about lowering the price of the electricity so that as you pay for what is being consumed? So I think a combination of this goes to the entire sector, the generation, transmission, and distribution, and the regulator. And the next one from the online is by Patrick Kachei Hwaho. The Narubale complex, Bujagali, Isimba, large dams operating at their full dependable capacity. So UETCL will comment on that. And to Wandera, our Director Corporate, the ERA website defines the BST as the price that UETCL sells to Meme and other distributors, which price includes the cost of generation and transmission, meaning that by BST, according to this question, already the transmission and the distribution cost is already removed. So the one is from Peace Ingabire. Is it possible to indicate what the average cost of transmitting and distributing a unit of electricity to the different customer category? That is industrial, commercial, what it is. So those are the set from online. I invite if there are any additional questions from the participants in the room. Then we go into the responses. I don't see any hand up. Do we have any person we will not give an opportunity to ask? I don't see anyone raising their hand. So let's start with Umeme on this question of many megawatts are being transmitted but not consumed. Of course, what he forgets that once you transmit also you have to extend the distribution network, and that is what we are working on before the electrons can reach the load centers. We have done so well in the generation and we are continuing. The transmission is reaching all parts of the country, but now the last mile to the consumer. And then also the question, the issue that Blessing presented, the cost of connection, because most of these consumers, they are waiting for government under the free connection policy. But among others, Umeme, do you want to add?
Thank you very much, CEO, and through the chair. In terms of the tariff in relation to domestics and others vis-a-vis the costs of delivering the service, when you look at the different categories, say for instance, the large power users, the industrialists, it is very easy to compute that cost because in most cases we'll build dedicated lines to them and the service related to that is very clear. When you look at customers who are based in cities, say for instance in estates where you have a large concentration of customers vis-a-vis a country where you can have one household living on a hill, and therefore you have to build the transmission line all the way through different hills just to get, 5 customers, the cost of delivering that service is much higher than the cost of delivering, say, to a condominium estate here in Kampala. So we have actually done an analysis of the cost to serve the different categories, those who are in cities and those who are towns and those who are up country. But that would not necessarily include the transmission cost. So it would be the total kind of distribution cost to serve. So I think that information can be made available at a certain point. Thank you very much.
Okay, can you pass on the mic to UEDCL along the same lines? The MD UEDCL is up here on the front line.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's quite important that we should note that for us to achieve a lower tariff, more distribution has to come on board. And our request to the customers, that as connections increase, we expect to consume more. And the biggest challenge that has been experienced of recent is the suspension of ECP. However, if more consumers are connected and more energy is consumed, it's expected that the tariff will be managed in that regard. Thank you very much.
Okay, I liked the beginning of the question, the statement which you didn't conclude. For you to consume much, the distribution network must be extended. For the distribution network to be extended, it must be provided for in the tariff. And then that is when, in the end, you are able to connect and achieve the reductions in the price. Thank you for that contribution. Let's pass on the mic to the UETCL. You can contribute on that, but as well as the one is inquiring at what is the current loading of Bujagali, Simba, and Narubali dams, given that now you have a surplus of only 100 megawatts.
Thank you, Chair, and the person who asked the questions. Of course, when it comes to the tariff going down, again, we come to that same question as my other colleagues have said, demand. And UETCL is expanding the grid even to industrial parks, because industrial parks do consume quite a bit of power. And to that end, for example, we've already finished the substations at Mukono, the substation at Luzira, although we are yet to connect that Luzira, Iganga, and Namav, Mbale, and Kapeka. Now, when those come online, as they are serving industrial parks in those areas, and we believe that demand will go up because of the stability of supply and adequacy of the same. Now, coming to these large hydros. Now, as a system operator, we do play that role of dispatch of these generation plants. And specifically for the large hydros, we do, each year, we do test these plants to ensure that what they said is available is what is actually available on ground. So we do go through what we call capacity tests. And we need to confirm, yes, Narubale, your tested capacity is so much. And now when it comes to the operational arena, we've got other technologies of generation. Solar, we've got the mini hydros, we've got the bagasse plants at Kachiras, Tulugazi, and all. Now those, because of policy, are always in the base when we're dispatching. When I say dispatching, it means instructions we give to the generation plants so as to provide a certain amount of power so that you supply the demand. Now, as to how much comes from each of these plants depends on the demand at any one particular time. If the demand is there, we can even run these to the maximum. But most times, because of lack of demand, you don't do that. And we try to optimize these in the way we run them, in that these, for example, Bujagali, Isimba, and Nalubale, Kira, are on the Nile. We try to optimize at least the water. We satisfy the demand, but optimize the water. We don't want to spill water unless it's strictly necessary. You want every drop of water to run through one plant, through the other one, and through the other one, so that you maximize the outputs from these plants. And thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, MDUETCL. There was another question here. Is it possible to indicate what the average cost of transmission and distribution is? These costs were presented because when you ask about the cost of transmission and distribution, this is what they were presenting as operation and maintenance cost, repair and maintenance requirement, staff, and some emergency capex for replacement of transformers and the towers. And you heard the presenter from transmission talk about need to go to monopoles from lattice pole because of vandalism. So these applications are available, and the worksheets can be accessed so that you update yourselves, because this is the information that was presented today. There was a question on Mputa. This project doesn't exist anymore. Even Albatros is not continuing anymore. There are two projects in the Albertine Graben that are related to the oil refinery activities. That's Sinop is one of them. And they are intended to use gas, and later on, after the commissioning of the refinery, to use the heavy fuel oil, which is a byproduct of the refinery. And then there is another comment here that Umeme, it will be great to get that information. So, Blessing, you promised the information. Please provide the information. Now, there is the last question from Katei Waho. It says, this is my last question. At our level of development, the biggest taxpayer and employer are the cottage industries, which in Uganda are located in the domestic customer category because they are geographically located there. This domestic segment is the biggest revenue earner for Umeme at above 83 billion shillings per month, but is affected by constrained demand of a tariff of 747.5 shillings per kilowatt hour. Maybe a tariff reduction in the domestic consumer sector would boost effective demand on average in the country. I think this is a contribution, it's not a question, and we welcome it, and it will be considered in the processes. Can Umeme roll out a plan where customers who construct their own lines are charged less for every unit consumed in a bid to expand consumption? And this is from John Kisitu. John, this is already existing. There is a rebate policy, only that the procedure is that the project should be approved before implementation so that we prepare to know how much we will rebate you or compensate you after the commissioning. So this rebate policy is readily available on the ERA website. Then you have Martha M. There is need to give hospital concessions in the tariff. That is noted. And the final one, Chair, before I hand back to you, there are two. The colleague, this is Robert Muhumuza, but also we had the Onyango. Question is related to Wenereko. We shall have another opportunity to respond, so we will not respond to that. But there is our colleague from the Electric Wiremen Association of Uganda. We would like the regulator to think of reducing the cost of connection to some affordable amount for a no-pole, and he's making his proposals here, and this will have a positive yield so that we are able to grow demand. We receive your comments, and it will be considered in the process of the determinations. Colleagues, that's the list of the questions from online. There is no hand up here physically, and I would like to hand back to the presiding officer of this hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair of the Chuan CEO, Electricity Regulatory Authority. May I now invite the Secretary to the Authority to make his summary on the presentations. Councillor Mwanda.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, as per the program, we're supposed to end at 1 p.m. It's exactly 1 p.m. It means that I have to be very brief. I have a summary of 16 pages, but given the time, I'll abridge it. The public hearing started at 8:30 with registration, introduction, opening remarks, rules, process for review of application. We received 5 presentations from the licensees, and we have had a discussion. The discussion attracted questions from the online participants and some questions from you inside this room. In summary, I'll just touch the salient aspects of the applications, focusing mainly on the budget application. UGCL made a budget application for 9 months, and the reason of 9 months is the expected expiry of the ESCOM concession. The figure is 103.2 billion. It had various drivers. UGCL also highlighted certain challenges. Key among them is the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the O&M activities, and also floating islands at the Lake Victoria, and also challenges related to takeover of the thermal plant in Namamvi. UETCL made a submission indicating a budget application of 1.6 trillion, and it covers 3 key areas: bulk supply, transmission and maintenance costs, and capital costs. Also, in their submission, they highlighted key challenges which are worth noting. Challenges of deemed energy costs related to IPPs, withholding of funds by UMEME and UEDCL, inadequate revenue to meet IPP demands. This has been elaborated as a result of a question from the audience. Outstanding amounts from defunct distribution companies, BEX and FADSALT, and effects of vandalism on transmission losses. Moving along, UEDCL made a budget application of 42.2 billion, and it is largely relates to monitoring costs of the lease and assignment agreement and the various activities under there. The next application was from ESCOM Uganda Limited in 3 broad areas: GOMC at USD 17.5, concession royalties, license fees at 3.2 $3.2 million, investments required as the concession comes to an end, about $11.9 million. UMEME made the last presentation, and in its presentation indicated the revenue requirement to be $194.1 million, and it is in 4 broad areas: investment costs, net operating costs, regulatory fees, and other cost adjustments. And one of the challenges which they highlighted was the effects of vandalism on the network, backlog in connections resulting from customers who have applied and have not yet been connected, and post-lockdown commercial losses, which were indicated to be 4% above the regulatory target. Umeme also indicated that there would be, they need support from government of Uganda and the agencies to ensure that resources are adequate for Umeme to deliver on the consumer needs in the year coming ahead, full recovery of costs to recognize shareholder investments, and to ensure that there is sufficient funding for ECP to enable 300,000 connections that are anticipated. Chairperson, finally, in the queue and in the discussion, we received, I noted 13 questions, which were ably answered by the various agencies represented here today. I will not go into the detail. We also got contributions from 2 participants. Chairperson and members, allow me to keep it at this. This, I believe, represents a fair summary of today's proceedings. I thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Secretary to the Authority. Dear participants, we are coming to the end of our public hearing today, and I want to take this additional pleasure to thank all of you for sparing time to come and participate in this public hearing. And I want in a special way to thank the online participants for being very active and engaging. The debate has been very insightful. All of us have takeaways, the regulator, the licensees, and other participants. We all have takeaways to work on. Questions have been asked and some answered. Let's continue with those engagements even after here, because as the key participants in the sector, especially the regulator and the licensees, we have to continue to be accountable to the public, to answer their queries. So those who may not have had the opportunity to raise their questions, you can do it after here, and I'm sure the respective participants or representatives will be able to respond to those issues you will raise. As for me, on behalf of the authority, we appreciate all the presentations from the licensees. We appreciate the contributions from the participants, and we have taken note, and we shall put into consideration all the information and process it and come up, as I said earlier, with a fair decision. Because as a regulator, our duty is to balance the interests of the stakeholders. This debate has been Closing prayer, departure is at pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. May we stand up and honor God. And let's humble ourselves for a closing prayer. Father, we thank you very much for today. We thank you for this successful public hearing. We thank you for the journey mercies that you brought, and we thank you for the protection that you put upon us. We thank you for the wisdom and the opportunity that you gave to us to serve in this sector. We pray that you continue to give us wisdom and help us that every discussion that we've had here shall be considered in the interest of all the players in the sector. And we shall be receptive to the decision that will come to the authority, and we shall comply as we continue to serve this country. In Jesus' mighty name we pray.
Let's move at the front. Don't go out. Please move at the front for a group photo. Move at the front for the group photo with the chair. Colleagues, kindly move to the front. Don't move to the front.